Okay, so imagine this, right? It's 1935. The Great Depression. It's hitting everyone hard. In Cleveland, Ohio, well, they're struggling like everywhere else. Now, on the shores of Lake Erie, some kids, they stumble across something just awful. It's the remains of a woman. But not just any remains. No, no. The body's been chopped up, head's missing, and her skin. It's been treated with some kind of chemical to preserve it, Gives it this creepy, leathery look. This wasn't just some random violence, no, sir. This was the start of something. This was the work of some of the newspapers would call the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Welcome to Crime Podcast's Twisted Crime series. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Over the next 4 years, this shadowy figure, he would terrorize the whole city. At least 13 victims. Their bodies, they were found scattered all over this desolate area. They called it Kingsbury Run, kind of a shanty town where society's forgotten people ended up.
Yeah, it's a really tragic case on so many levels. These victims, they were mostly drifters, sex workers, people barely getting by. They were already vulnerable. And even in death, a lot of them, they were never identified, like erased, not once, but twice. Really makes you think about how society just neglected these people back then. Certain folks, they were practically invisible.
It's
Yeah.
heartbreaking. And this killer, it's like he picked them on purpose.
Yeah.
Chose a place to hunt where people wouldn't be missed so much.
Exactly. Kingsbury Run, they sometimes called it a hobo jungle, though honestly I don't like that term much. But it was a place where people just fell through the cracks. People passing through, out of work, maybe struggling with addiction, mental illness, who knows. It wasn't the kind of place that got much attention. It's perfect for someone who wanted to stay hidden.
And this Mad Butcher, he didn't just kill them. He really messed them up.
Mm-hmm.
Decapitation, dismemberment, sometimes even, emasculation.
There was this awful precision to the crimes. It wasn't just anger or just being brutal. It was planned. Like methodical. The killer, he had some knowledge of anatomy, that's for sure. Maybe even medical training, who knows. And that chemical preservative, that was a really creepy detail.
Yeah, that's what got me too. You don't see that every day in a murder case. Was that like a common thing back then for killers to do that?
Not at all. It makes you think, like maybe he wanted to keep them somehow. Some folks think he might have wanted trophies or even, experiment on the bodies. It's a pretty disturbing thought.
It's scary to think that someone like that could be walking around free. And all of this, it happened right under the nose of Eliot Ness, the guy who brought down Al Capone. You'd think he'd, solve this no problem.
It's funny, actually. It's one of the big ironies of his whole career. See, Ness became safety director in Cleveland in '35, right when these murders were happening. He came in with a reputation, untouchable crime fighter. But this was his biggest challenge.
I can only imagine the pressure he was under. The public, they were terrified. The newspapers, they were going crazy. And here's this legendary lawman, and he can't stop the killings.
You got it. And to make things worse, it's like the killer was taunting Ness. One time they found a victim's body right near Ness's office window. It was like the killer was saying, "Catch me if you can."
I was just chilling. Sounds like this killer was playing some kind of twisted game.
Yeah, seems that way. And even though Ness tried his best, the investigation was really tough. A lot of the victims, they moved around a lot, so identifying them was almost impossible. And back then, they didn't have all the fancy forensics they got now, so they couldn't get much from the crime scenes either.
So it was like the worst possible situation. Vulnerable people, a smart and sneaky killer, and a city living in fear.
Right, and right in the middle of it all, you got Eliot Ness, trying to be the hero everyone expects, but facing this case that makes no sense.
It's a fascinating story, even though it's so grim.
Yeah.
So did they have any leads? The investigators, I mean. Any suspects that stood out?
Well, there were a couple of guys who caught their attention, each one with their own, let's just say they had some pretty interesting and ultimately frustrating connections to the case. So one of the guys they looked at, his name was Frank Dolezal.
Dolezal? Wait, wasn't he connected to one of the victims or something?
Yeah, that's right. He was a bricklayer, but he had a history, violence, alcoholism, that kind of thing. He actually knew a few of the victims from Kingsbury Run, and get this, he even confessed to killing Florence Polillo. She's one of the few victims they were actually able to identify.
He confessed. So, I mean, they got their guy, right? End of story.
Not so fast. Dolezal, he later took back his confession, said the cops forced him into it, claimed they beat him, threatened him, the whole 9 yards. And then, to make things even weirder, Dolezal died in jail.
Died? How'd that happen?
Officially. They said it was suicide. Hung himself. But the timing was fishy, you know? A lot of people thought something else was going on. Some even said, well, they said maybe the cops killed him to stop him from talking. Maybe about police brutality, or maybe he knew something about the real killer.
Whoa. Hold on. So now we got a confession, then he takes it back, then he turns up dead in jail. It's like something out of the movies.
Right. You think it can't get more complicated? Then we get to suspect number 2. A guy named Dr. Francis Sweeney.
A doctor? Wait a minute. Didn't we talk about how, like, the killer had to know about anatomy, how precise those cuts were?
Bingo. Sweeney was a surgeon. And not just any surgeon either. He was an expert in amputations. Knew the human body inside and out.
Okay, that's a little too convenient, don't you think? What else pointed to this Sweeney guy?
Well, for starters, he was known to have some mental problems, sometimes violent too. And when they questioned him about the murders, he flunked a bunch of lie detector tests. Oh, and here's the kicker. Not long after the killing stopped, Sweeney checked himself into a mental hospital.
Okay, so we've got a surgeon, got a messed up past, knows his way around a body, fails the lie detectors, and then boom, he's in the loony bin. It's all starting to make sense, kind of.
It's pretty convincing, yeah. But there's one more thing about Sweeney. He had some powerful friends.
Friends. What kind of friends are we talking about here?
Well, his cousin was a big-shot congressman back then. And some folks think those connections, they might have protected Sweeney, kept him out of trouble. There's rumors, about evidence disappearing, investigations getting shut down.
Are you saying, like, a cover-up? The big guys protecting one of their own?
That's the theory that's been floating around for years, and the way they kept everything so hush-hush about Sweeney, well, it doesn't exactly help, does it?
Man, this is crazy. So Ness wasn't just up against some smart killer. He was up against, like, the whole system. They might have been protecting the guy he was looking for the whole time.
It's possible, yeah. And that might be why, even though Ness did everything he could, the Mad Butcher was never caught. But listen, the story of Eliot Ness and these torso murders, it doesn't end there. There's more to tell. There's a final chapter. And it shows just how much this whole thing messed with the guy who was once America's top cop.
It's almost like this Mad Butcher case, it really did something to Eliot Ness, like broke a part of him.
Yeah, in a way, you're right. Before he came to Cleveland, Ness was, a symbol, hope, justice, all that. But the torso murders, they kind of chipped away at that, showed everyone that even the best cops, they can't always win.
And it wasn't just, like, his job, right? It seems like it really got to him personally, this whole thing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. Ness was only in his early 30s when this all went down. He was young, and I think maybe he thought he could handle anything, solve any crime. But this case, it showed him just how bad people can be, how messed up the system is sometimes, and, well, it showed him his own limits, too.
You said before that Ness's career, it kind of went downhill after he left Cleveland in '42. What did he do after that?
Well, he tried different things, bounced around a bit, worked security, did some consulting, that kind of stuff. He even ran for mayor of Cleveland in '47, figured maybe he could change things,
Yeah.
in the city that had caused him so much trouble.
Did he win?
Nope. Lost that election. And I think, losing that plus all the baggage from the torso murders, it really pushed him down a bad path, started drinking heavy, relationships fell apart. The guy who used to be a hero, he was becoming a shadow of his former self.
Man, that's rough. This hero, this icon, and he's being eaten up by the very thing he spent his life fighting.
Yeah, it's a real tragedy. Makes you wonder, what if he'd never gone to Cleveland? What if he'd stayed in Chicago, enjoyed all the fame from taking down Capone? Would things have been different for him?
I guess we'll never know, will we? But it's important to remember, I think, that even heroes, they have their limits. And sometimes the fights they get into, they leave scars that never really heal.
That's true. And for Ness, those torso murders, they were a wound that just kept bleeding. Always there, reminding him of what he couldn't do, reminding him of how much evil there was in the world.
It's a heavy thought,
Yeah.
but it also makes you realize we need people like Eliot Ness, people who are willing to stand up to the bad stuff, even when it seems like they can't win, even if it costs them their peace of mind.
And it reminds us, the fight for justice, for the truth, it never really ends. Maybe they never caught the Mad Butcher, but those victims, they deserve to be remembered. Their stories, they need to be told.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank you all for joining us for this deep dive into the mystery of the Cleveland torso murders. It's a case that, it just keeps fascinating and horrifying people, don't it? A real testament to the darkness that can hide anywhere. Make sure you follow and subscribe to CrimePod Castle and our YouTube channel for more stories about the darker side of humanity. Until next time, keep that curiosity going. Stay safe and remember some mysteries. They're meant to stick with us, to make us think, to remind us that even when things are bad, the search for the truth, it can never stop.